A lot of times when families are embroiled in a high conflict divorce, separation, and the courts get involved, frequently there's a team mentality where an alienating parent will try to gather up people on their side to prove, in our adversarial system, you have a contest between evidence to see who's the better parent. So in that fight, alienating parents in particular will try to gain the favor of all the professional participants. Sometimes you'll have a guardian ad litem involved if it's an extremely high conflict case, and they come in to represent the children. And then, of course, that makes the alienating parent even more prone to want to, quote, protect the children. So in this dynamic, we see something called, a perverse family drama triangle, which is the alienating parent will form a coalition with the child against the targeted parent, and then we'll try to gather up the professional participants to take their side, the alienating parent's side. And this frequently develops out of an enmeshed relationship between the alienating parent and the alienated child. And so as soon as the alienating parent has got the favor of the child on their side, then it's much easier for them to exploit the child in front of a guardian ad litem, in front of a therapist, in front of, sometimes when you have investigations that involve allegations of abuse, you'll have law enforcement involved, you'll have CPS workers, child protective services workers. And so these people get involved and embroiled in what amounts to a narrative script that's formulated by the alienating parent in an effort to control the situation. Because typically alienating parents are what we call narcissistically vulnerable. They feel very threatened when part of their identity is being diminished within the dissolution of the marriage, so they externalize the blame and project it outward towards the targeted parent. And the children get involved in that, and they're caught in the middle. So there's an extreme amount of pressure put on the child to exhibit loyalty towards the alienating parent. And that same amount of pressure that's put on the child is also then projected onto the professional participants. So what you end up having is you have in a perverse family drama triangle, you have the identification by the alienating parent as the rescuer, and the child as a victim of being hurt or harmed in some way by the targeted parent through some either exaggerated or completely fictitious dramatic script. And these are the kind of dramatic scripts that you see normally in family therapy, where somebody is being scapegoated. In a normal, healthy triangular situation, triangle and family conflict, it's resolved by someone within the triangle. If you have parent, parent, child, the blame shifting travels around. Somebody takes it on the chin one day, somebody takes it on the chin the next day, or whatever, and somehow the conflicts are resolved. It's only when it becomes rigid and fixed, where somebody is always being the scapegoat, that it becomes problematic and pathological. So it's referred to in the literature as a pathological system. And that's very difficult to identify. Third-party alienation simply means that when a professional participant, like a guardian ad litem or a CPS worker, or most often a therapist, is solicited to become an ally for the alienating parent's story. So once they buy into the story, then they most frequently become like what we call a rescuer. And so they're no longer trying to help the family as a whole. They're taking a side against the targeted parent based on mostly either false drama scripts or exaggerations of things that really aren't harmful or dangerous to the child. Typically, when you're talking about a brainwashing process of trying to get a child who loves the targeted parent to hate them, you have to go through a process of vilifying the targeted parent. When you weaponize a child, it stems from two kinds of abuse. The first kind of abuse we call corrupting emotional abuse. And that's a process whereby the alienating parent will take a child who has love and affection for the targeted parent and will corrupt it by vilifying the targeted parent, by creating this campaign of denigration that grinds and wears away the child's investment in the love and affection that they have for them, so that the child can feel what the alienating parent is feeling. So the alienating parent has this reward system. Once they get an ally out of the child to hate the other parent, then the child, once the child has been successfully programmed to believe, or at least go along with, the alienating parent's vilification scripts, then the alienating parent will exploit the child. So we'll say, here, it's the child that doesn't like the parent. So it's a bait and switch. You have a corrupting emotional abuse, and typically parents who corrupt their children will often exploit them in these kinds of circumstances. So then the child then becomes a weapon. That's when we use the term weaponized. And it's extremely powerful when the child goes along with it and internalizes it and starts to believe it. So over the course of time, sometimes 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, and especially in small children, it can happen really quickly. And you'll have a child who naturally gravitates to have affection for the targeted parent, will then go to a therapist who is being told by the alienating parent, and then the child then mimics and parrots what the alienating parent says bad about the targeted parent. And so the therapist will write little notes to the court saying this child does not want to have any kind of relationship with the father or the mother, and they don't like them. And then so the child will then comply with that by not being affectionate towards the targeted parent. Well, EMDR therapy is a recognized therapy for real instances where a child or a parent or an adolescent has experienced real trauma. And it's called eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. That's EMDR. Okay, so what it was designed for was soldiers who had seen death, or people who had been surrounded by death and real horrific experiences. That those are initially called potential traumatic stressors, because not all soldiers come back and exhibit post-traumatic stress disorder. So there's a whole process when you get a child into therapy who's in the middle of a high conflict divorce. There's a process of differential diagnosis. You have to establish whether or not the child has actually experienced a traumatic event that involves some sort of horrific, like death, for example, and whether or not they are dysfunctional because of that trauma. And so that process in and of itself takes a while. So typically what happens with the EMDR therapist, they are often exploited by alienating parents. They'll take them for the therapy and say, my child is experiencing this trauma, and it's because of all these bad things the targeted parent is doing to them. An incompetent therapist will take it at face value and just say, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and they'll write it down, and then they'll start treatment. So, and they don't even find out or test, is the trauma being experienced by the child being involved in the divorce in general? Are they experiencing it between the alienating parent and the child out of a sense of loyalty conflict? Or is there something actually going on in the targeted parent-child relationship where there's actual real emotional abuse or physical abuse? In my experience, I've been involved in about 162 cases across the United States. The times that I run into the EMDR therapy, when the therapist has become aligned with the alienator, they didn't go through that process. The EMDR therapy, the problem with it, if you have a non-abused child and that's not traumatized by alleged bad behavior by the targeted parent or fictitious allegations that had been made by the alienating parent, then the EMDR, part of the protocols is for them to imagine the trauma that the alienator says this child is experiencing at the targeted parent's house. So then they imagine trauma that they really haven't experienced, or exaggerated dramatic scripts, and they call it up into their mind, and they're supposed to think about it. So in the worst case scenario, one of the cases I dealt with was a 12-year-old boy who the stepmother and the father in this case had told him that his mother didn't really want him when he was little, and wished that she had aborted him. And then along with it was this script that, oh, by the way, when you were 4, your mother tried to kill you with a knife. So this whole kill you with the knife script, and the boy says, I don't remember that. That never happened to me. So they take him to the EMDR therapist, and they do this movement with their fingers back and forth while they're trying to bring up this, oh, your mom, remember the time that your mom tried to kill you with a knife? Just try to bring it up in your mind. And when the child tries to bring it up in memory, it's not there. So, but then it's been suggested. So they go home and it's been talked to through conversations. Oh, you really did experience this. I remember I saw your mom do it. And so research into these kinds of scenarios and controlled experiments have shown that 80, 90, 50, sometimes 50, up to 90% of participants will develop a false memory just by having that suggested to them. When you have dramatic false scripts like being rejected and potentially killed by a mother in the case that I was talking about, this little boy then is traumatized by a false memory and then comes to find in himself what's now become part of his autobiographical story that, hey, my mom didn't want me. She did this horrible, nasty thing. Maybe what my dad and my stepmom are telling me is really true. That's where you have the development of an alienated child. And it has long-term negative consequences if not arrested. And so the child can, because a normal, healthy child who has a normal sense of ambivalence, which you would say the child would be able to contextualize the realities of both parents as their my mom and dad both do good and bad things. I love them both. It's okay. For an alienating parent, they think I'm going to lose contact with this child that I need to have in my life every day because they're there. And if I feel threatened, I'm going to get as many people as I can to help me make sure that I have that child with me all the time. And that person over there who cheated on me or did something horrible in the marriage to cause it to break down, they don't deserve to have a part in this child's life because they're part of our tribe. And then once that's developed into a campaign of denigration, then you go out and using your, you get people outside of the tribe to become part of it. And that's what we would call third-party alienation. You get a third person who's not involved in the conflict to take sides. If a child is kidnapped by a stranger, there's a psychological component which is the most damaging part of the kidnapping. In other words, the kidnapper has exclusive proprietary control over what relationships that child can have. They are no longer allowed to, in severe cases, allowed to leave the premises. They're no longer allowed to have friends. They're no longer to see their parents. So that psychological component happens in brainwashing and programming parents who engage in alienating tactics. And in some cases that I've dealt with, there will be actual kidnapping. I had one case where the mother had kidnapped the children to another country. And the father, it took 2 years to get the children back. Some cases that I've been involved with, the judge will scoff and kind of laugh when you mention that the children were kidnapped locally, like within the same jurisdiction. And because they don't recognize it, because they're thinking in terms of that it only has to be the severest of cases to qualify for a, quote, kidnapping. The difficulty in taking a family conflict and getting the judge to understand what's going on, especially when you're talking about third-party alienation, because the judge may be seeing before him or her a guardian ad litem lawyer that they have a personal relationship with. So when the alienating parent, or let's say the alienated parent, the targeted parent, says that this guardian ad litem doesn't have it right, the judge doesn't know the targeted parent as well as he or she knows the lawyer guardian ad litem. So then you say this third-party alienation. And the judge says, wait a second, I know this person. They wouldn't fall prey to any false stories. They really know what's going on. I'm going to take their word for it. That was a 10-year-old boy, and he had an 8-year-old brother. And the mother was really, really angry that she didn't get full custody. And they ended up with joint custody, shared custody, like 50-50. She developed the idea that their 10-year-old son, Eric, was sexually abused by the father. And she took that allegation and took the boy to a therapist, who then treated the boy as a sexual abuse victim. Now, this is while this was referred to CPS for an investigation, Child Protective Services and law enforcement. And they went through 2 years of investigating this. The father passed 2 polygraph tests. And the CPS and law enforcement said, it didn't happen. Move on. Get over it. But the court system really wasn't aware of it. It didn't get into the court record. And the therapist continued to treat this boy as if he was sexually abused. So then we have a brainwashing effect, a rehearsal effect. And so over a 6-month, year, 18 months, 2 years, finally this boy is convinced that his father was sexually abusing him and was believing it and developing false memories for it. While that was going on, the psychiatrist, one of the psychiatrists who was providing medication for the boy, was dosing him with Prozac at the request of the mother. Now you're dosing him with Prozac under the premise that his feelings against his father are escalating, because now he's thinking that my dad has done all these nasty things to me, and my mom wants him dead. And there was even evidence that the mother had threatened to kill him, and she was arrested for it, threatened to poison him with insulin while he was sleeping to kill him. And so all of these kill messages were going forward until one day, 1 week, that they went to the therapy, and the therapist put the mother had put the ID in the therapist's head, and the therapist put the ID in the 10-year-old boy's head, Eric, that his little brother was sexually abused by the father as well. The mother was upset about it, Eric was upset about it, and this was sort of the trigger mechanism that caused this boy to completely snap and wanting to fulfill the wish for what his mother wanted him to do was to kill his father. So she left a loaded gun, a pistol, and he went out and shot his father and killed him in the driveway when the father came to pick him up for visits, while the younger brother was in the car. And then he went back into the house and gave his mom the okay sign. And then when the little brother was asked to write about an event, a scary event in their life, in school, he wrote down that his mother had told his older brother, to kill their father. So this was an extreme example, because you have 2 alienators. You have the mom and you have the therapist. It boils down to training. Therapists, psychologists, mental health professionals in general, social workers, and legal professionals should be trained in these kinds of dynamics that occur. And part of that training should be that when families are embroiled in conflict, that the family should be treated as the client, not one of the family members, because if a child is suffering from some sort of emotional issues within a family conflict, it's because if you don't address the family as a whole, the child's problems exist within the context of the conflict. The training would be a really big help.